20 years had passed since Sora stood before the Galactic Assembly and changed the course of history with her words. The quarantine proposal had failed by a margin of 12 votes. And in the decades that followed, humanity's reputation across the galaxy had transformed in ways no one had predicted. They were no longer known primarily for their wars and their chaos and their dangerous unpredictability. Instead, they had become famous for something else entirely, for their stubborn and irrational kindness that confused and amazed the older species human. Doctors traveled to plague worlds and treated patients regardless of species or politics. Human soldiers defended colonies that had no strategic value simply because people there needed protection. Human families adopted orphans from a dozen different worlds, following the example set by a paramedic in a small Colorado town. The galaxy had a word for this phenomenon now, and in most languages, it translated roughly to the human way. Sora Yoon had become one of the most respected voices in galactic diplomacy, serving as a senior ambassador who spent her life building bridges between species. Speeches were studied in universities across 100 worlds, and young diplomats of every race sought her guidance. But despite her fame and influence, she still called Marcus every week to ask for advice, and every year, without exception, she returned to Earth for his birthday. This year was special because Marcus Yoon was turning 70 years old. The whole family had gathered at the small house in Colorado where everything had begun. The same house where Sora had first learned the word for Father Ji Woo, had become a renowned xenomedical specialist whose research had saved countless lives across the galaxy. And she had brought her husband and children to celebrate. Sora had brought her own family as well. 2 adopted children of different species who called Marcus grandfather and fought over who got to sit on his lap. The house was crowded and noisy and filled with laughter, and Marcus complained about the chaos while secretly loving every momentous ceremony was held in town that afternoon, organized by the local government with support from the Galactic Cooperative itself. The small mountain town where Marcus had found a dying alien child in an alley had been declared a heritage site with an official designation that translated as the place of first kindness. Representatives from a dozen species had traveled to Earth specifically for this occasion, and they stood respectfully as a monument was unveiled in the town square. Monument showed 2 figures, a human man carrying a small alien child. Through falling snow, Marcus stood at the front of the crowd with his daughters on either side of him, and his face was red with embarrassment. He had never wanted fame or recognition, and the attention made him deeply uncomfortable. When the officials asked him to speak, he kept his remarks brief. "I just did what anyone would have done," he said. And then he stepped back from the microphone before anyone could argue with him. Sora watched her father retreat into the crowd with a smile on her face. He always said that, she thought, and he had never understood that the world was full of people who would not have done what he did. That evening, the family gathered on the back porch of the house as the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening blue. Marcus sat in his old rocking chair with a blanket over his legs, watching his grandchildren chase fireflies in the yard. Jiwoo brought him a cup of tea and kissed him on the forehead before joining her husband by the garden. Sora sat down in the chair beside her father and looked up at the stars she had once drawn from memory for her sister. The galaxy was out there, vast and complicated and full of beings who were still learning what it meant to be kind. But right here on this porch, everything was simple and good. "Thank you," Sora said to her father without looking away from the sky. Marcus glanced at her and raised an eyebrow in question. "For what?" he asked. "For everything," she said. "And for that night in the snow, and for every day after." Marcus was quiet for a long moment before he responded. "You would have done the same for me." he said. Sora smiled and felt tears prick at her eyes. I know, she replied, because you taught Mesh. Leaned her head against his shoulder, the way she had done since she was a frightened child wrapped in a stranger's jacket. And he put his arm around her the way he had done since the first moment he decided she was worth saving. They sat together in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. The grandchildren eventually tired themselves out and were carried inside by their parents. And Jiwoo brought more tea before kissing them both goodnight. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, and somewhere out there in the darkness were worlds and beings that had been touched by what began on this porch. Marcus had never sought to change the galaxy, but he had done so anyway. Simply by being himself, he had shown the universe what humans were capable of when they chose love over fear. And Sora had spent her life making sure that lesson was never forgotten. Do you remember what I wished for on my first birthday with candles? She asked, and Marcus thought for a moment before shaking his head. I wished for things to stay exactly as they were, she said. And then she laughed softly at the memory Jiwoo told me that is what I should wish for. She continued, and I wished for our family to stay together forever. She looked at her father with eyes that still held the wonder of a child seeing kindness for the first time. And here we are, she said. Marcus smiled, the rare full smile that only his daughters ever saw. Here we are, he agreed. The night grew cold, but neither of them moved to go inside. There would be time for sleep later, but this moment was too precious to waste. A retired paramedic and his alien daughter sat together under the stars. Two people whose chance meeting in a snowy alley had changed the course of galactic history. And if you had asked Marcus Yoon whether he regretted his choice, he would have looked at you with confusion and said the same thing he always said: she was a child who needed help. He would reply, and that was all that mattered. That was always all that mattered. And perhaps that simple truth was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, not technology or strength or ambition, just a stubborn belief that everyone deserves to be saved, especially those who have given up hope, especially those who are freezing in the dark, especially those who need someone to see them and say the words that change everything. Dad, she is freezing, and then to do something about it. The grand chamber of the Galactic Cooperative Assembly was the largest enclosed space Sora had ever seen. A vast dome that could hold 100,000 beings and still have room for more. Delegates from dozens of species filled the curved rows of seats that rose up toward a distant ceiling, and their combined murmuring created a sound like the ocean. During a storm, Sora stood in the waiting area behind the main stage and tried to control her breathing as she watched the current speaker finish his address. Marcus and Jiwoo sat in the front row of the visitor section, and every time Sora looked at them they smiled and gave her small nods of encouragement. Ambassador Teven and his faction had positioned themselves prominently in the Lorian section, and Sora could feel his eyes on her like a cold weight. She knew what they expected to happen today. They expected her to stumble and fail, to prove that humans had corrupted one of their own beyond repair, or perhaps they expected her to be so forgettable that her words would change nothing at all. Either outcome would serve their purposes and help push through the quarantine vote tomorrow. Sora had not slept in over 30 hours, but she had never felt more awake in her life when the announcer called her name. She walked to the podium on legs that wanted to shake, but refused to give her enemies the satisfaction. The chamber fell silent as she took her place. And the silence was not respect, but skepticism and challenge. Thousands of alien eyes watched her and waited for her to speak. And for a long moment, Sora simply looked back at them. Then she began, not with the statistics and diplomatic language they expected, but with a story. 17 years ago, she said, I was dying in an alley on a planet called Earth. Her voice carried through the chamber, amplified by technology she did not understand. And she let the words hang in the air before continuing. I was a child who had watched her parents murdered by terrorists. And I had survived on the streets for months eating garbage and hiding from everyone. She described the cold of that winter night and the certainty she had felt that death was coming for her at last. She described the darkness and the hunger and the way her body had started to shut down as the snow fell around. Harry had given up hope, she told them, because I was alone and I was dying, and I believed that no one in the universe cared whether I lived. The chamber was completely silent now, and even Ambassador Tevin's faction had stopped their whispered conversations. Then, a human child saw me from her father's vehicle, Sora continued, and she tugged on his arm and said 5 words that saved my life. She paused and looked directly at the visitor section, where Marcus and Jiwoo sat watching her with tears in their eyes. Dad, she is freezing, Sora said. And those were the words my sister spoke when she saw me dying in the cold. She described how Marcus had stopped his vehicle and walked into that dark alley without knowing what he would find. She described how he had taken off his own jacket and wrapped it around her shaking body, how he had carried her the warmth and safety without hesitation. He did not know my species, she said, and he did not know my name or my history, or whether helping me would bring him trouble. She let those words sink in before delivering the next part. All he knew was that a child was freezing to death, and that was enough for him to act. Sora spoke about the months and years that followed, about the way Marcus had fought the bureaucracy to adopt her legally. She spoke about Jiwoo teaching her how to build snowmen and blow out birthday candles, about the quiet moments that had healed her wounded heart. She spoke about the neighbors who had shunned them and the officials who had tried to take her away, and about how Marcus had never wavered in his commitment to her. He never asked for recognition, she said, and he never expected reward because he simply saw a child who needed help. Then she turned her attention to the quarantine proposal that hung over the chamber. Like a dark cloud, I know that some of you want to isolate humanity, she said. And I know the reasons you give for this desire. She listed them one by one. Human unpredictability, human aggression, human irrationality, human capacity for violence. You fear them because they do not calculate advantage before they act, she said. And you fear them because they form attachments that defy logic. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. You fear them because they will fight for things that offer them no benefit, and because they will sacrifice themselves for strangers. She let the silence stretch before she delivered her response. I am standing here because of that irrationality, she declared, and I am alive because a human being decided that a freezing alien child was worth saving, even when it cost him. The chamber stirred with whispers as delegates turned to each other in surprise. Some of them had never heard an alien speak about humans with such conviction, and the experience was unsettling for beings who had always considered themselves superior. Sora was not finished. You measure species by their technology and their lifespan and their economic output, she continued, but humans measure themselves by a different standards. She thought of Marcus cooking dinner for his daughters, of Jiwoo holding her hand on that first terrifying night. They measure themselves by whether they helped the person in front of them, she said. And perhaps that is why you fear them. Final words rang through the vast chamber like a bell. They remind you of what you have forgotten, she declared, and they challenge you to remember what it means to care about someone simply because they need youth. Chamber erupted in noise as delegates shouted and argued and pounded on their seats in the traditional sign of approval or disapproval. Ambassador Tevin was on his feet with fury burning in his silver eyes, but other Valorians around him seemed shaken and uncertain. Sora stepped back from the podium and walked on trembling legs to rejoin her family in the visitor section. Marcus stood and caught her in his arms as she nearly collapsed from exhaustion and relief. You did good, he said simply, And the pride in his voice meant more to her than any applause. Yeji hugged them both and cried without shame, not caring who saw. The debate continued for hours after Sora's speech, with delegates arguing passionately on both sides of the quarantine question. Some called her testimony manipulative and anecdotal, a single story that proved nothing about humanity as a whole, but others spoke in her defense, sharing their own encounters with humans who'd shown unexpected kindness and courage. When the session finally ended, a senior delegate from a species called the Vorath approached the Yoon family in the corridor outside. "I have lived for 300 years," the ancient being said in a voice like rustling leaves, "and I have never heard a more powerful argument for anything." The delegate bowed to Marcus with a respect usually reserved for heads of state. "You have raised a remarkable daughter," the Vorath said, "and your species should be proud of what you have shown us today." That night, alone in her quarters, Sora found a message waiting on her personal device. The sender was anonymous, but the content was clear. "Withdraw your support for humanity before the vote tomorrow." The message read, "Or face consequences that will destroy everything you have built." Sora stared at the threat for a long moment before carrying her device to her father's room. Marcus read the message without expression, and then looked up at his daughter with steady eyes. "We did not come this far to back down now," he said. And that was all that needed to be said. Sora nodded and felt her fear transform into something harder and more determined. Tomorrow the vote would happen, and whatever came next, the Yoon family would face it together. 10 years had transformed the frightened child from the alley into a remarkable young woman who carried herself with quiet confidence and grace. Sora Yoon stood tall now, taller than most humans, with the elegant posture that was natural to her species. Her blue-gray skin had deepened to a richer shade, and her large dark eyes held a wisdom that came from surviving terrible things and finding love on the other side. She had graduated from university 2 years early with degrees in xenobiology and interspecies diplomacy, and her professors had called her one of the most brilliant students they had ever taught. But despite all her accomplishments, she still called Marcus every week and asked for his advice on everything from career decisions to what she should eat for dinner. Jiwoo was 20 years old now and studying medicine at a university in Denver. Following the path her father had walked before her, the sisters talked every day through video calls that lasted for hours, and they visited each other whenever their busy schedules allowed. Marcus was proud of both his daughters, though he would never say so directly because he was not the kind of man who spoke about his feelings. He showed his love through actions instead, through the meals he cooked when they came home and the quiet way he listened when they needed to talk. His hair had gone gray at the temples and his joints ached on cold mornings, but he still worked as a paramedic because he could not imagine doing anything else. Helping people was what he was born to do, and he would keep doing it until his body refused to cooperate. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who wore the uniform of the Galactic Cooperative. Sora stared at the elegant document with its holographic seal and felt her hands begin to shake. The Galactic Cooperative Assembly, the governing body of over 40 species, was inviting her to speak at their annual summit. The topic they wanted her to address was human integration into galactic society, and they had chosen her specifically because of her unique perspective. She was one of the few aliens who had been raised by humans, and her story had apparently spread farther than she ever imagined. Sora's first instinct was to refuse, because she had spent years avoiding the spotlight and building a quiet life as a human in all but biology. The idea of standing before thousands of alien delegates and speaking about her personal experiences filled her with a fear she had not felt since childhood. She called Marcus that night and told him about the invitation, expecting him to understand why she wanted to decline. But her father surprised her with his response. You have something to say that nobody else can. He told her in that calm, steady voice she had loved since the first night he saved her. And you lived it in a way that no one else has. Sora argued that there were other people better suited for such a task. People who were trained speakers and diplomats. Marcus listened patiently and then asked her a simple question, if not you, he said. Then who she had no answer for. Thatjiwu called the next day and added her voice to their father's side. Are not just representing yourself, her sister said with the fierce loyalty that had never faded over the years. Because you are representing us and our family and everything we have been through together. Sora realized that refusing would mean letting fear win. And that was something the Yoon family did not do. She accepted the invitation on one condition: that her family would come with her. The journey to the assembly station took 3 days aboard a Valorian transport ship. And Sora spent most of that time staring out the window at the stars she had once drawn from memory. Marcus sat beside her and read a book on his tablet, as calm as if they were taking a bus across town instead of traveling to the center of galactic civilization. Bounced between excitement and nervousness, asking Sora questions about the different species they would meet and the protocols they should follow. The assembly station was larger than anything Sora had imagined. A massive orbital structure that housed millions of beings from dozens of world ships of every size and design came and went like insects around a hive. And the station itself glittered with lights that rivaled the stars beyond when they docked and stepped onto the main concourse. Sora felt the weight of countless eyes upon Hirsch. He was Valorian by blood but human by upbringing. And the other Valorians she passed regarded her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed disgust. One of them whispered something in the old Valorian tongue that Sora barely remembered, and the word they used roughly translated to contaminated. Marcus noticed her flinch and put his hand on her shoulder in a gesture of silent support. Their quarters were luxurious by human standards, with separate rooms for each of them and a common area that looked out over the stars. A Valorian official came to greet them and explain the schedule for the summit, and his politeness was so cold that it felt like an insult after he left. Jiwoo said what they were all thinking. They do not like that you are one of them who became one of us, she observed, and that scares them. Sora nodded. Because your sister was right. The next morning, she received a visitor she had not expected. Ambassador Teven was a high-ranking Valorian diplomat who had known her biological parents when she was still a child, was tall even by Valorian standards, with silver-white skin that marked him as old and distinguished. His eyes were kind when he looked at her, but there was something calculating beneath the kindness that made Sora uneasy. He told her that he had watched her career with great interest and that he believed she had the potential to become a leader among her people, her true people. He emphasized the Valorians who shared her blood and her heritage. Sora listened politely as he spoke about opportunities for her to reconnect with her roots and reclaim the legacy her parents had left behind. But when he suggested that her human upbringing was a phase she could move past, something inside her went cold. These humans raised me, she said in a voice that did not waver. And they are my family, and I am proud to be one of them. Ambassador Teven's kind expression flickered, and for a moment she saw disappointment and perhaps something darker. He wished her well with her speech and departed, leaving Sora with the feeling that she had just made a powerful enemy. That evening she learned the true stakes of what she was walking into. A friend from her university days, now working as a junior diplomat on the station, came to her quarters with urgent news. Certain factions within the assembly were pushing for humanity to be classified as a quarantine species, which would mean isolation from galactic society and the end of all diplomatic relations. The vote was scheduled for the day after his speech, and the outcome was far from certain. Sora felt the fear rising in her chest. But then she looked at Marcus and Jiwoo sitting together on the couch, her father was teaching her sister a card game he had learned during his military service. And they were both laughing at how badly Jiwoo was losing. These were the people she was fighting for. And failure was not an option. She sat down at the desk in her room and began to write her speech. And she did not stop until the station's artificial sun rose the next morning. The snow fell thick and heavy over the small mountain town in Colorado. And Marcus Yoon drove carefully through the empty streets with his daughter, Jiwoo, sitting beside him in the passenger seat. She was only 8 years old, but she had the eyes of someone much older. Always watching and always noticing things that others missed, Marcus glanced at her and smiled. Grateful for her company on this cold winter evening, they had just finished buying groceries and the bags sat in the back of the truck, filled with vegetables and rice and the chocolate milk that Jiwoo loved so much. The heater hummed and the windshield wipers worked hard against the falling snow. Marcus was tired after a long shift as a paramedic, but he felt peaceful with his daughter beside him. 7 years had passed since the aliens first made contact with Earth, and the world had changed in ways both wonderful and terrible. Some people welcomed the visitors from the stars, while others feared them and hated them. Marcus tried not to think about such things too much because he had enough to worry about with raising Jiwoo alone. His wife had died giving birth to their daughter, and the grief still lived inside him like a quiet wound that never fully healed. But Jiwoo gave him reason to keep going, and he loved her more than anything in the universe. They were passing through the old part of town when Jiwoo suddenly sat up straight and pressed her face against the window. "Dad," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "Stop the truck." Marcus slowed down and looked at her with concern. Asking what was wrong, she pointed toward a dark alley between two old brick buildings. "There," she said. "I saw something move." Marcus pulled the truck to the side of the road and peered into the shadows, but he could not see anything through the falling snow. It was probably just a stray dog or a cat looking for shelter from the cold. But Jiwoo shook her head and grabbed his arm with her small fingers. "No, Dad," she insisted. "It looked like a person, and I think they are in trouble." Marcus sighed and turned off the engine because he knew his daughter well enough to trust her instincts. Told her to stay in the truck and keep the doors locked while he went to check. The cold hit him like a wall when he stepped outside, and he pulled his jacket tighter around his chest as he walked toward the alley. His boots crunched in the fresh snow and his breath came out in white clouds. The alley was dark and filled with garbage cans and old boxes, and the smell of rotting food hung in the air despite the freezing temperature. Marcus was about to turn back when he heard a sound that made him freeze in place. It was a whimper, soft and weak and filled with fear. He moved deeper into the alley, and his eyes adjusted to the darkness until he saw a small figure huddled behind a dumpster. At first, he thought it was a child, but then he saw the blue-gray skin and the large dark eyes that reflected the distant streetlight. It was an alien, and she was young and terrified and shaking so badly that Marcus could hear her thin limbs rattling against the frozen ground. She wore clothes that were torn and dirty, and her skin had a grayish tint that Marcus recognized from his medical training as a sign of severe hypothermia. In that moment, he did not think about politics or fear or the complicated relationship between humans and aliens. He only saw a child who was dying from the cold. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her trembling body, and she flinched at his touch but was too weak to pull away. "It is okay," he said in the gentlest voice he could manage. "I am not going to hurt you, and I'm going to help you." He lifted her in his arms, and she weighed almost nothing, like a bundle of thin bones wrapped in cold skin, when he carried her back to the truck. Jiwoo had already opened the back door despite his instructions to stay inside. Her eyes went wide when she saw what her father was carrying, but she did not scream or back away. Instead, she helped him lay the alien girl across the back seat and immediately started piling blankets over her. "Dad," Jiwoo said with tears in her eyes, "she is freezing, I know. Marcus replied as he started the truck and turned the heater to maximum. But we are going to warm her up, and she's going to be okay. He drove home faster than he should have on the icy roads, but he could hear the alien girl's breathing, becoming weaker with each passing minute his training as a combat medic kicked in, and he started calculating what he would need to do. Once they got home, warm fluids and gradual heating and monitoring for shock, the alien girl made a sound that might have been words in her own language, but Marcus could not understand them. Jiwoo reached over from the front seat and held the alien girl's hand, and something in that simple gesture seemed to calm her when they arrived at their small house on the edge of town. Marcus carried the alien girl inside and laid her on the couch near the fireplace. He started a fire and gathered more blankets while Jiwoo heated water for warm compresses. They worked together in silence, father and daughter, doing what needed to be done, without question or hesitation. Over the next few hours, the alien girl's shaking gradually stopped and the color began to return to her skin. Her eyes fluttered open and she looked around with confusion and fear. But Jiwoo sat beside her and spoke in a soft and soothing voice. "You are safe now," Jiwoo said, "and my dad saved you, and nobody is going to hurt you here." The alien girl could not understand the words, but she seemed to understand the tone because some of the tension left her thin body. Marcus watched his daughter comfort the strange visitor and felt a surge of pride in his chest. He knew he should contact the authorities and report the aliens' presence because there were protocols for such things, but looking at the frightened child on his couch, he could not bring himself to make that call tonight. Tomorrow he would figure out what to do. But tonight she would be safe and warm in his home. Jiwoo looked up at her father with a question in her eyes. "What is her name?" she asked. Marcus shook his head because he did not know then. Jiwoo smiled and looked at the alien girl's blue-gray skin that reminded her of a winter sky just before dawn. "I'm going to call her Sora," she announced, "because it means sky and she looks like the sky." The alien girl blinked at the sound of the name, and something that might have been understanding flickered in her large dark eyes. "Sora," Jiwoo repeated while pointing at her, and then she pointed at herself and said Jiwoo, and then she pointed at Marcus and said, "Dad, Sora." The alien girl whispered in a voice like wind through dry leaves, and it was the first human word she ever spoke. Marcus stood by the fireplace and watched his daughter teach their unexpected guest the names of things, and he knew in that moment that their lives had changed forever. He did not know what the future would bring or how the world would react to what he had done, but he knew that he could not have left that child to die in the cold. No matter what species she belonged to, some things were more important than rules and regulations and politics. Some things were simply right, and Marcus Yoon had always tried to do what was right, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. 6 months had passed since that cold winter night, and Sora had learned to speak English with a speed that amazed everyone who met her. Her species, the Valorians, were known throughout the galaxy for their exceptional memory and their ability to learn languages faster than any other race. But Marcus suspected that her rapid progress had more to do with Jiwoo's patient teaching than any natural ability. The two girls had become inseparable from the very first day, and now they shared a room and whispered secrets to each other long after Marcus told them to go to sleep. He would stand outside their door sometimes and listen to their soft voices mixing together, and the sound filled his heart with a warmth he had not felt since his wife was alive. Sora had grown stronger in the months since her rescue, and her blue-gray skin now had a healthy glow instead of the deathly pallor she had worn when Marcus found her. She was still thin and small for her age, but she ate everything that Marcus cooked and asked for seconds with a shy smile that he could never refuse. The nightmares came less often now, But sometimes Marcus would wake in the middle of the night to find Sora standing in his doorway with tears streaming down her face. On those nights, he would make hot chocolate for both of them, and they would sit together in the kitchen while she told him about the things she had seen. Her parents had been diplomats, she explained in her careful English, and they had come to Earth to help build peace between humans and Valorians. But there were humans who did not want peace. And there were aliens who felt the same way. A group of terrorists had attacked their transport ship as it landed. And Sora had watched her mother and father die in the explosion. She had run into the chaos of the city and hidden like a wild animal for months, eating garbage and sleeping in alleys and trusting no one. The things she described made Marcus sick with anger and sorrow. But he kept his face calm and his voice gentle as she spoke. He told her that she was safe now and that no one would ever hurt her again. He told her that she was part of their family now, and family protected each other. Sora looked at him with her large dark eyes and asked if he really meant what he said. Marcus took her small hand in his and promised her that he did. The process of making that promise legal took almost 2 years and nearly broke Marcus in ways that the war never had. The government had created something called the Interspecies Adoption Framework, but it was designed more to prevent adoptions than to allow them. There were interviews and home inspections and psychological evaluations and background checks that went back to Marcus's childhood. Officials came to the house and asked Sora invasive questions about her past while Marcus stood helpless in the corner. Some of the social workers were kind and some were cruel, and one of them suggested that Sora would be better off in a government facility with others of her kind. Marcus had to leave the room to keep himself from saying something that would ruin their chances. Not everyone in town supported what he was trying to do. His own brother called him a fool for taking in an alien, and some of his neighbors stopped talking to him altogether. Parents at Jiwoo's school complained about Sora attending classes with human children, and for a while the principal tried to have her removed, but Marcus fought every battle with the same stubborn determination that had kept him alive during his years of military service. When people asked him why he was doing this, his answer was always the same: "She's my kid now," he would say. And that ended the discussion. Jiwoo stood by her father and her new sister through all of it, and her loyalty never wavered. Even when other children called her names, she told Marcus that Sora was the best thing that had ever happened to their family. And he knew in his heart that she was right. The two girls did everything together, and Jiwoo took joy in teaching Sora about all the human things she had never experienced. They built snowmen in the backyard and made snow angels and had snowball fights that left them both laughing and shivering. Jiwoo taught Sora about birthday candles and the tradition of making a wish before blowing them out. When Sora asked what she should wish for, Jiwoo told her that she should wish for whatever would make her happiest. Sora closed her eyes and blew out the candles. And later she told Jiwoo that she had wished for things to stay exactly as they were. In return, Sora taught Jiwoo about the stars and showed her maps of the galaxy that she drew from memory. She helped Jiwoo with her homework and taught her Valorian mathematics, which was more advanced than anything the human schools offered. The girls balanced each other perfectly, with Jiwoo bringing warmth and humanity, while Sora brought knowledge and wonder. Marcus watched them grow together and felt grateful every single day, but the years of struggle took their toll on him, and the old nightmares from his military service began to return. He would wake up sweating and shaking, his mind trapped in memories of blood and fire and the screams of dying soldiers. One night, the dream was so bad that he cried out in his sleep, and the sound echoed through the small house. When he finally woke up and stumbled to the bathroom to splash water on his face, he found Sora sitting on the floor outside his bedroom door. She looked up at him with those large dark eyes, and he asked her what she was doing there. She told him that she had heard him struggling, and she wanted to be nearby in case he needed help. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes as he looked down at this child who had suffered so much and yet still thought of others before herself. "Why did you stay?" he asked her. "Because you did not come inside or wake me up." Sora stood and brushed off her pajamas before looking up at him with an expression that seemed far too old for her young face. "You protected me," she said simply, "and I wanted to protect you." Marcus knelt down and hugged her, and she hugged him back with thin arms that were stronger than they looked. He realized in that moment that the healing went both ways, and that saving Sora had also saved him the day the adoption was finally approved. Marcus cried for the first time since his wife's funeral. Sora Yoon became the first legally adopted alien child in the state of Colorado. And for one brief moment, their little family was famous, and news crew came to the house and asked them questions. And Marcus answered as briefly as he could while the girls hid in their room. He did not want fame or recognition or any of the attention that came with what he had done. He just wanted to raise his daughters in peace and give them the best life he could. After the reporters left and the phone stopped ringing, the Yoon family settled into a quiet routine that felt like home. Marcus did not know that their story had spread far beyond Earth. He did not know that across the galaxy, beings of countless species were talking about the human soldier who adopted an alien orphan. He did not know that Sora's survival and rescue had been noted by people in very high places. All he knew was that he had two daughters who loved him and whom he loved in return. All he knew was that their family was complete, and for Marcus Yoon, that was more than enough.